Hey everyone. I was taking some time to look into how water hopping actually worked, and this trick turned out to be a lot more nuanced than I would have thought. So I thought I'd share it with all of you. I'll begin with a quick demonstration here. So if we do a dive here, right? I'm gonna try to keep things consistent. So I'll hold A until this frame, when the A button begins to shift a little bit. So this is when I'll release A. And I'll equip Iron Boots on this frame when Link makes a splash on the surface. Cool. So that's Water Hop. This is nothing special. This is what we're all familiar with, right? So now I'll do it one more time. So again, I'm releasing A on this frame when the A button changes. And I'm equipping irons here. And this time the water hop didn't work, right? So we did exactly the same inputs. One time it worked, one time it didn't. So what actually happened? If you look at the numbers on the screen, the top one is actually Link's Y coordinate. So you'll see that when he's on the surface of the water, he's bobbing up and down. And the point at which you start your dive actually matters for those particular water hop frames, right? So if we were to start our dive at a high point, this does not work. But if we started our dive at a lower point, this will work. So you might ask at this point, like, oh, like, isn't this an easy fix? Why don't we just dive a little deeper, right? It turns out, like, a deeper dive does not mean a successful water hop. So I'll get more into that. First, let me show you like some frame data that I've compiled. So to read this here, we're gonna take this column. This is the 41 is how many frames you hold A before you let go, and this corresponds to what I just showed you. So 41 is the dive depth where the A button begins to change. And as you can see, for this, equipping irons on the frame that you surface and on the frame before will work. But if you do it at a bob height that's too high, this no longer works. And then if you go deep enough, it will work. If we were to say dive one frame deeper, it turns out, yes, no matter your bob height, water hopping will work. But if you go just one frame deeper than that, a high bob no longer works, a low bob no longer works, but anything in the middle will. And then one frame past that, there are no working frames. So just because you try to dive deeper before you start to surface, it doesn't mean that you'll necessarily get a successful water hop. Before I go too deep, I just want to say, like, I didn't extensively test this past this point, so I don't know what this data looks like. The frames here are just for some arbitrary bob height, like what I've found, right? So on this frame, like for some bob height, I found that like these two frames work. If you go to this depth, I found that 3 frames work. And over here, like there are even 4 working frames for equipping irons. But I don't know whether that's true for certain bob heights or not. That's not something I tested extensively. So yeah, to go back to some like misconceptions about water hop, right? A deeper dive does not mean that the water hop will work. Sometimes you're like guaranteed to have working frames. Sometimes you're guaranteed to not have working frames. And then another misconception that gets thrown around a lot is that there's a 2-frame window for equipping irons. Well, sometimes that's true, and sometimes you have 0 working frames. Sometimes you have 4, right? The other misconception that I hear a lot is that you need to equip irons a lot earlier than you think you do. And this is sometimes true. As you can see here, like as we dive deeper, equipping irons on this frame that you surface doesn't actually work anymore, but equipping it 2 or 3 frames earlier does, right? And I think where this misconception stems from is that like people are told to let go of A when they see like the number change on the A button. And if you wait half a second after it changes, you end up in these columns. So you end up in dive depths where equipping irons on the frame that you surface no longer work, but it does work if you equip earlier, right? So I think that's what people have started to do is dive to these depths and try to equip irons 2 or 3 frames earlier than you would expect, right? The other thing I wanted to mention, this isn't quite a misconception, but there is a video that Kitstifer posted about how to get more depth without a scale. So like for context, if you dive without a scale, right, there are no working frames that you can get unless you like press the B button. But there is a way to start your dive a little deeper than the surface. So it's effectively getting like a really deep bob before you start your dive. And what this does is it just shifts you from this column where there's no working frames to one of these columns where sometimes you will now get working frames, and other times if you started it too deep, like you won't, right? So you're still kind of playing the lottery of like, oh, did I start my dive at a point where my water hop will now work, right? So it's not fully consistent, but it will go from having 0 working frames to possibly having more, right? So knowing all of this, the question is like, how do we make water hop more consistent? So I have a couple things that you can experiment with. But first, like if you've already been doing water hop and you feel like it's already fairly consistent, I'd say just keep doing what you're doing. So you probably fall into this category of like you release A around half a second after that button changes, and you equip irons, 2 or 3 frames before you surface. If that's been working for you, I'd say like stick with it. Just know that like the depth that you dive to actually matters. Like if you dive too deep, I think from what I found, like you might start failing the trick. And if you don't go as deep as you normally do, again, you might end up in some frames where it doesn't work. And then you might also be subject to like the bob height that you start at, which is something I haven't tested too much, so I don't know exactly how that looks like. But these are all things to keep in mind of like why your water hop might sometimes work and might sometimes not work. My suggestion, if you're just looking for consistent frames that seem to work pretty well, I'd say to aim for these 3 depths. So again, to just show it off, you're looking to dive until the A button changes. So this is the 41st dive frame. When the A button's gone, that's the 42nd. And when the next number appears, that's the 43rd. So you're looking to release A on one of those frames. You're just reacting to when the A button changes, which is a pretty strong visual cue. And if you happen to release on this frame, like you're good to go. You will have 2 working frames. If you happen to release A on this frame, most bob heights do work. So you'll usually still get this trick. And if you happen to release one frame a little too late, like if you happen to be in the middle of a bob, like you're good. Otherwise, yeah, this trick might not work. If you really want, you can try to pay attention to the bobs. Like it is kind of hard just looking at Link to tell whether you're like at the peak or at the bottom, right? So what I'd like to look at is like the A button here. You can see that's very clearly going like up and down. So like at the peak, I can wait until it's like starting to descend. And now I would have hit A here on this frame, 719. And this, you can see like if you started your dive here, it doesn't matter if you release A here, here, or here, it will work. So you can, if you want to, you can try to pay attention to the bobbing. I think personally, it's a little too much for me and I don't think it's necessary. You can just try to keep aiming to release on this frame, regardless of bob, and you should be good. The other thing I've looked into for making this more reliable is adding in a B press on your way up. So what this looks like here, I'll just work with this here. So like here on like this is the 43rd dive frame. We go up a bit, right? We hit B partway up, and then we equip irons. So this, again, like we started a dive on a frame that would have already worked. But what I've found is that for 41 and 42, hitting B, like, if it already worked, it will continue to work. And in fact, in the case of 42 here, it actually gives us an extra frame to work with if we press B before we surface. And then what I found for 43 is that it turns frames that don't work into frames that do work. So here, if we press B 3 frames before we surface, the next 3 frames we can equip Iron Boost just fine. It doesn't quite work if you do it 2 frames before you surface, unfortunately. But the takeaway here is that pressing B on your way up doesn't mess with the working frames here, but it does fix the frames here that don't work. I've tested this both for a high bob and a low bob. Pressing B does turn these into green frames. So now we have 2 frames where the bob height doesn't matter at all, and then 1 frame where, unfortunately, I don't think a B press fixed these, but it did keep these insane. So one thing you can try is pressing B on the way up from your dive before you equip your Iron Boots. One thing I do want to note is that this testing wasn't super extensive. I wasn't able to test like all the bob heights with like all the possible dive depths with all the possible B press timings. That's just a little too much for me to handle right now. So it's possible that there are frames where pressing B makes your dive, which would have worked, no longer work. I haven't looked into that too much, but I know that can happen sometimes. I just haven't seen it happen for these yet, which is good. For actually executing this, it might be a little tricky for some people. I actually do a very like strange grip for my water hops. I'll do my pinky on A, ring finger on B, and then my thumb on the D-pad. So I'll dive with A, and then in succession I'll hit like B iron, B irons, so with my ring finger and then thumb. So that's how I'm able to just do that. So whenever like right before I'm about to equip irons, I just do B and then iron. And if you don't like that, I'd say you can stick with not adding in the B press. These frames without a B press are just fine. Like as long as you aim for this and then sometimes hit this frame, sometimes hit this frame, you'll get it fairly consistently still. And in practice, like I've done that before and it seems to work pretty well. So yeah, hopefully you learned a thing or two from this video, and hopefully this makes your water hops a little more consistent. So yeah, good luck.